What they put him and his family through, the Democrats, over the last few weeks is horrible. If you look at what he's had to endure, horrible, false statements, it doesn't get any worse. But the beautiful thing is he is now in. He's going to be there for a long time.
So what happened, Yamiche, between the time you talked to the president and that?
Well, I think what happened was that the president sensed this cultural reckoning and capitalized on that, and capitalized on the idea of victimhood. So at that press conference in New York, when he did say that Christine Blasey Ford was credible, he also said that he felt that he had been falsely accused by many women who have alleged that the president of the United States sexually assaulted them or was acted inappropriately sexually to them. Those women are still claiming that to this day. He said, I'm a man who's been falsely accused, and that's going to have an impact on the way that I look at this. And when you look at the way that he then mocked Christine Blasey Ford, you have to understand that there were so many White House advisors that I talked to who said they were asking the president to be reserved. They were asking the president not to attack this woman. And instead what he did was he said, I'm going to go with my gut once again, which is what he did all throughout his campaign. And I'm going to go for the jugular on this woman. And he did that. He mocked her. He had people laughing at her. I think what's really important is not just the president mocking Dr. Ford, but also the crowd. The crowd was laughing and having a good time. And he got that from them and said, you know what? I can do this. I can push this forward. And after Justice Kavanaugh was confirmed, the president was asked, what did you think about your Mississippi speech? Do you think it had an impact? And he said, yeah, I thought it was a very big impact. So what you have is the president saying, this Me Too movement, there are some people who think it went too far. He's trying to take the idea that we're looking at victims of sexual assault, and of course that's both men and women in the Me Too movement, and saying that men might be the victims now, that there might be so many men that are falsely accused that we now have to rethink the whole cultural reckoning that we're having, which is the Me Too movement.
On the left, by the way, of your screen in New York is our protests that are underway. We've got cameras across the country where there are protests underway about the appointment now and confirmation of Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Michelle, let's just, you're there in New York, let's just ask about this question. The president said very clearly, and the White House expressed the strategy that this was going to galvanize Republicans, this idea of being a scary time for young men. What Yamiche was just talking about, the statistics do not bear that out whatsoever. Of all sexual assaults and rapes reported, some very small proportion get reported. Of those, some very small proportion get prosecuted, and a yet smaller proportion end up with any sort of conviction or anything going on. The incidence of wrongful accusations lies somewhere between 2% and 8%, depending on what you study. So it's not really a thing, but the president seems to have capitalized on it as a thing.
Well, right. I mean, just as the president capitalized on a non-existent crime wave by undocumented immigrants. I mean, I think that it's always been clear that this president is the face of white male backlash. And he, again and again, you know, despite people's determination to pretend that it was kind of quote-unquote economic anxiety that propelled him into the position that he's in, he understands his base and their resentment and their grievances really, really well. And I also want to say something about this, you've galvanized Republicans. There's this kind of abuser's logic to this, you know, look what you made me do, the way they keep acting about how it was protesters or it was incivility or it was Michael Avenatti that made Jeff Flake and made Susan Collins vote for this nominee. They were always going to vote for this nominee. They were determined to vote for this nominee. So there was never a point that I can see that Susan Collins was wavering. She wanted any excuse to get to yes. And the very fact that they're blaming Democrats suggests to me an element of guilty conscience, right? Because you don't blame other people for making you do something if you think that that was a blameless thing to do.
Margaret Carlson, you have been covering the issues that have now become a very clear cultural divide, the very thing that is on the screen that you are sharing right now. This is our country's cultural divide. There are people who thought maybe we had hit a low in our empathy toward each other a couple of years ago. Maybe we're not even close.
Well, Ali, you know, I'm just thinking, looking at the New York protest, you know, maybe the gap changes again because of protests like this. This takes a lot of energy to do on a Saturday night, to get yourself out there. It'll probably translate to votes, so that the Democratic enthusiasm is going to increase for this election. You know, what I was trying to describe before is, you know, women were blamed for Brett Kavanaugh's anger. You know, he wouldn't have been angry if you hadn't brought this up. And Michelle is making that point as well, which is women were to blame for all of this, all the pain to his family, everything about this drawn-out process, when all a woman did was say what happened to her. Republicans thought they had to hear her. They actually humored her and brought in a prosecutor. But they didn't even come close to believing her or taking it seriously. And what they did by sloughing it off, you know, if I didn't know Senator Jeff Flake, I would have thought he had just been put out there calling for this FBI investigation, which turned out to be the end of the whole thing, because the FBI investigation gave them all a fig leaf to vote for Kavanaugh, and it all ended.
A week ago, it seemed like he might have been pushing a cloud away from above the Supreme Court, and in the end, it may have ended up as exactly what you said, a fig leaf. Michelle Sindor, Margaret Carlson, thank you for being with us on a Saturday night. Michelle Goldberg, stay with me. Brett Kavanaugh officially confirmed to the Supreme